His dog never disobeyed him until that morning she refused to move. Behind those bushes, his whole life was waiting. Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the endless Montana sky as Samuel Thornton rode his chestnut mare along the western edge of his property. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain, and somewhere in the valley below, cattle moved like dark shadows against the browning grass. Samuel had inherited this land 5 years ago when his father passed, leaving behind nothing but 600 acres of wild country and a debt that would have broken a lesser man. Now, at 32, Samuel had paid every penny owed, built the ranch into something respectable, and earned the quiet admiration of folks in Silver Ridge, the small town that sat 3 miles east of his property line. But admiration did not fill the empty chair across his supper table. Respect did not warm the cold nights when winter howled against his cabin walls. Samuel pulled his hat lower against the wind and clicked his tongue, urging his mare forward. Beside him, his faithful border collie, a black and white dog named Dusty, trotted with purpose, nose to the ground, tail swaying gently. Dusty had been with Samuel since she was 8 weeks old, a gift from a traveling preacher who claimed the pup was special. Samuel had not believed in special anything back then, but over the years, Dusty had proved herself more than just a working dog. She sensed storms before the clouds gathered. She found lost calves when Samuel had given up hope. She seemed to understand his moods before he understood them himself. Today, Dusty was acting strange. Samuel noticed it first when they reached the old creek bed that marked the northern boundary of his land. The dog stopped walking, her body rigid, ears forward, eyes fixed on something beyond the thicket of wild roses that grew along the water. Samuel reined in his horse and waited. Dusty did not move, not an inch, not a muscle. Samuel dismounted and walked toward her, his boots crunching against the dried leaves that carpeted the ground. He placed a hand on her head, but she did not acknowledge his touch. Her attention remained locked on whatever lay hidden beyond those roses. Samuel followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the creek, low from the dry summer, and the cottonwoods that lined its banks, their leaves trembling gold and amber in the morning light. He tugged gently at Dusty's collar. She refused to move. This was unlike her. Dusty always obeyed, always. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, a strange sensation he could not name. Curiosity, concern, something else entirely. He stepped forward, pushing through the rose bushes, careful to avoid the thorns that reached for his coat sleeves. The branches parted, and Samuel stepped into a small clearing near the water. Then he saw her. A woman sat beside the creek, her back against a fallen log, her head tilted down toward her chest. Her dress, once blue, was now torn and muddied at the hem. Her dark hair had fallen loose from whatever pins had once held it, cascading over her shoulders in tangled waves. A small traveling bag sat beside her, its contents spilling onto the damp earth. Samuel's heart stopped for a full beat before resuming at twice its normal pace. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. As he drew closer, he noticed the rise and fall of her shoulders. She was breathing. Thank the Lord above, she was breathing. He knelt beside her and spoke softly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and Samuel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. They were the color of spring leaves after rain, green with flecks of gold that caught the morning light. They held confusion at first, then fear, then something that softened into cautious relief. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as nothing more than a whisper. "Water, please." Samuel moved quickly, pulling the canteen from his belt and holding it to her lips. She drank slowly, her trembling hands rising to steady the container against his own. When she finished, she let out a breath and closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was stronger now, though still fragile. "I did not know how much longer I could wait." Samuel sat back on his heels, studying her. She was thin, too thin, and there were shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there was strength in the line of her jaw, determination in the way she held herself despite her obvious exhaustion. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, She thought for a moment. Since yesterday afternoon. My horse threw a shoe and ran off. I tried to walk to town, but I got turned around. Then my ankle, she gestured toward her left foot. And Samuel noticed for the first time the way it was positioned, the slight swelling visible even through her worn boot. Samuel stood and extended his hand. Can you stand if I help you? She looked at his hand for a long moment, something unreadable passing through those remarkable eyes. Then she nodded and placed her fingers against his palm. The contact was brief, practical, necessary. Yet Samuel felt it echo through him like a stone dropped into still water. He helped her to her feet, and she leaned against him as they made their way through the rose bushes to where his horse waited. Dusty was there now, having finally abandoned her post, her tail wagging as she circled the woman with obvious approval. Your dog, the woman said softly. She found me. Samuel looked down at Dusty and felt a swell of gratitude for his faithful companion. She has a gift for finding what matters. The woman smiled, and Samuel thought it was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 5 long years. He helped her onto his horse and walked beside them as they made their way back toward his ranch. She told him her name was Eleanor Price, and she had been traveling from Denver to meet a cousin in Silver Ridge who had promised her work as a seamstress. The stagecoach had left her at the wrong stop, and she had purchased a horse to complete the journey on her own. That was my first mistake, she said with a rueful laugh. I know nothing about horses. Samuel smiled. Horses know when someone is uncertain. They test you. Eleanor nodded, her eyes moving across the landscape as if memorizing every detail. This is beautiful country. Wild, but beautiful. It takes some getting used to, Samuel admitted, but once it gets into your blood, nothing else compares. They reached the ranch house as the sun climbed toward noon. Samuel helped Eleanor down from the horse and guided her inside, settling her onto the worn sofa near the fireplace. He built a fire to chase away the chill that had settled into her bones, then busied himself making tea and warming leftover biscuits from that morning's breakfast. Eleanor watched him move about the cabin, her expression thoughtful. You live here alone? Samuel nodded, not trusting himself to elaborate. It is a lovely home, she said softly. It has warmth, character. Samuel handed her a cup of tea and sat in the chair across from her. It needs more than one person to make it feel complete. The words escaped before he could stop them, and heat rushed to his face. He had not meant to be so honest, so vulnerable with a woman he had known for less than an hour. But Eleanor did not seem uncomfortable. She simply nodded, as if she understood something he had not yet said. I know that feeling, she said. I have felt it for a long time. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and Dusty settled at Eleanor's feet, resting her head on the woman's good ankle with a contented sigh. Samuel sent word to town that afternoon, and by evening Dr. Harris had arrived to examine Eleanor's injury. The ankle was badly sprained but not broken. She would need rest and time to heal before she could continue her journey. Samuel offered his spare without hesitation, and after some gentle persuasion from both him and the doctor, Eleanor agreed to stay. The days that followed passed like pages in a book Samuel never wanted to end. Eleanor healed slowly, and as she did, she began to make herself useful around the ranch. She mended shirts that Samuel had neglected for months. She organized his kitchen, which had descended into chaos after his housekeeper had moved away the previous spring. She read aloud in the evenings from the small collection of books Samuel's mother had left behind. Samuel found himself hurrying through his work each day, eager to return to the cabin and the quiet joy of her company. He discovered that Eleanor had a sharp wit that made him laugh more than he had in years. He learned that she had lost her parents to fever when she was 17 and had spent the year since then working as a governess for families who treated her as little more than a servant. He understood why she had risked everything to travel west, chasing the promise of independence and a fresh start. And somewhere in those lengthening autumn evenings, as the fire painted golden light across her features and her laughter filled the empty spaces of his home, Samuel Thornton realized he was falling in love. He did not speak of it. He could not. Eleanor was healing, and she had plans, a destination, a cousin waiting for her in Silver Ridge. She had never spoken of staying, and Samuel would not burden her with feelings she might not share. But sometimes, when their eyes met across the supper table, or when their hands brushed while passing a dish, Samuel thought he saw something in her gaze that matched the ache in his own heart. 3 weeks after Dusty had led him to that clearing by the creek, Eleanor stood in the cabin doorway, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and amber. "My ankle is nearly healed," she said quietly. "I should send word to my cousin. She will be worried." Samuel stood beside her, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender that always seemed to surround her. "Of course, I can ride to town tomorrow and send a telegram on your behalf." Eleanor nodded, but she did not move. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Samuel," she said finally, and the sound of his name on her lips made his heart stutter. "I need to tell you something." He turned to face her. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. Eleanor looked up at him, her green eyes glistening in the fading light. "These weeks here, with you, they have been the happiest of my life. I came west, searching for independence, for freedom, for a place where I could belong. I thought I would find it in a shop in town, sewing dresses for strangers, but I found something else instead." She paused, and Samuel saw the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability she was offering him like a precious gift. "I found you," she whispered, "and I do not want to leave." Samuel felt something break open inside him, a dam that had held back years of loneliness and longing. He reached for her hands and held them gently in his own. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been alone for so long. I told myself it was enough, that the land and the work and the sky were all I needed. But then Dusty led me to that creek, and I saw you sitting there, and everything I believed about myself was proven wrong." He stepped closer, close enough to see the tears forming in her eyes. "I love you," he said. "I love your laughter and your strength and the way you hum while you work. I love how you read aloud like every word matters. I love that you see beauty in this wild country that so many others find too harsh. I love you, Eleanor Price. And if you will have me, I want you to stay, not as a guest, but as my wife." The tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, that radiant smile that had captured his heart from the very first moment. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Samuel. 1,000 times yes." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as if she were something infinitely precious, because she was. She was the answer to prayers he had stopped believing would ever be answered. She was home in human form. Below them, Dusty let out a soft bark of approval, her tail wagging against the wooden porch floor. They were married 2 weeks later in the little white church in Silver Ridge. The whole town turned out to witness the union of the quiet rancher and the woman his dog had found. Eleanor's cousin stood as her witness, delighted that her letter had led to something far greater than a job in a dress shop. The winter that followed was the coldest in 20 years, but Samuel hardly noticed. His cabin was filled with warmth now, with laughter and conversation and the gentle presence of the woman he loved. Eleanor transformed the house into a true home, adding curtains to the windows and quilt to the beds and flowers to the table when spring finally arrived. And always, Dusty was there, lying at Eleanor's feet, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this woman to arrive. One evening, as they sat together, her on the porch watching the stars emerge above the mountains, Eleanor reached for Samuel's hand. "I think about that day often," she said. "The day you found me by the creek. I was so afraid. I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life, coming out here alone. I thought I would never see another sunrise." Samuel squeezed her hand. "But you did see another sunrise. Because of Dusty," Eleanor said, reaching down to stroke the dog's soft fur. "Because she refused to move until you came." Samuel looked at his faithful companion, now gray around the muzzle, but still bright-eyed and alert. "She knew," he said softly. "She knew you were what we needed." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was so lost, Samuel, not just that day by the creek, but for years before. I did not know where I belonged or what my life was supposed to mean. And then I opened my eyes, and there you were, and suddenly, everything made sense." Samuel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of lavender and home. "That is how love works, I think. It finds us when we stop looking. It arrives in unexpected places, brought by unexpected messengers. Like stubborn border collies who refuse to move, Samuel laughed, the sound rich and full in the quiet evening, exactly like that. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, all the ordinary trials that came with ranching life. But Samuel and Eleanor faced them together, their love deepening with each passing season. They welcomed a son 3 years after their wedding, a bright-eyed boy they named Thomas after Samuel's father. Dusty appointed herself the child's guardian, sleeping beside his crib each night, following him with patient devotion as he learned to crawl, then walk, then run across the fields she had once patrolled alone. And every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, Samuel and Eleanor would walk together to that clearing by the creek, to the place where Dusty had refused to move, to the spot where their story had truly begun. They would stand there in silence, hand in hand, and give thanks for the mysterious providence that had brought them together. For a dog who sensed what her master needed before he knew it himself. For a woman brave enough to chase a dream across 1,000 miles. For a love that bloomed in the wild Montana hills, as enduring as the mountains, as endless as the sky.